welcome to Paisley Festival. My name is Sumayya and today I'm going to be showing you a henna workshop. We're going to go through various stages of how to prepare the skin, some facts about henna, and also just a step-by-step tutorial on some of the henna patterns that you could do. There are lots and lots of different tutorial videos on YouTube and on the internet that you can follow after you've seen this workshop as well. So don't feel that you have to follow the exact pattern that I'm going to be teaching you today. But there are just some step-by-step guides and little fun facts about henna and things to keep in mind if you do decide that you want to do henna today. So the things that you're going to need obviously will be a piece of henna comb. You can mix your own henna if you want, but if you are a beginner, it's probably best if you get pre-made henna in a cone. This is an example of natural made henna. So you can go to a store and get henna cones that are pre-made, but you just need to be careful because some henna does contain other chemicals and toxins that you may not be aware of, and they don't always show and disclose that in the ingredients. So it's always good to make sure that the henna you're buying is from a certified seller and that they have clearly said it is 100% henna. I would always recommend that you do a patch test before you begin doing henna, especially if you have more sensitive allergy prone skin or if you're prone to things like eczema, for example. It's always a good idea to just take the henna that you've bought and just try a little bit on the area where you're thinking of applying henna. It is not for oral consumption. It is typically used topically on the skin or in hair. You can get henna separately for hair as well. That will contain other products like shea butter, for example, that will help moisturize the area after you've applied the henna. I wouldn't apply henna for the skin on the hair, for example. I would buy that separately. Now that that's out of the way, the other things that you're going to need as well is either a small cup, or you could just use, like I have, a little spoon and some oil. The oil that I'm going to be using today is coconut oil because it does smell nicer. You can use olive oil, for example, or jojoba oil. These are all fine and appropriate to use. I'll explain more later why we need oil, but it's always good to keep in mind henna is quite a perfumed, I like to say, product, and if you are sensitive to smells, it's always good to do it in a well ventilated area. And just consider, for example, like I'm using coconut oil, and that's going to hopefully just make the smell, reduce the smell a little bit and make it smell a little bit nicer afterwards. I did find when I used olive oil that the smell on my skin for a few days did smell of olive oil, and I didn't really like that, especially after the smell of henna. So I've decided to use coconut oil instead. It will also protect your skin if you are going to be washing that area frequently. So for example, if you come into contact with water frequently throughout the day, especially since we are applying it on our hands and we do have to wash our hands as well, it's good to apply an oil afterwards so that you can protect and preserve the henna and help make it last as long as possible. You will also need a scraper. I am using this beet scraper that I've used for hair removal. Make sure that it's clean, and this will help to scrape the henna off. If you don't have something like this, you could, for example, use a clean thin piece of cardboard, for example, or a card. Again, just make sure that it's nothing too abrasive, and when you are scraping the henna off, that you do it gently because you don't want to agitate the skin, especially if, like myself, I have sensitive skin, so I need to be careful when I'm removing the henna that I'm not too abrasive with it. If you do find that you're struggling to take off the henna, this is where having the oil comes into play. You can use the oil to help scrape the henna off afterwards. I have put down some cling film wrap just to protect the surface area that I'm working on. I've also got some paper towels here so I can test the henna out as I'm applying it, and also protect the surface area and just rest my hand on there. This is going to take at least an hour or two to do, depending on how quick you are at doing henna. If you are perhaps more professional or used to using henna, you might take a little less time. If you're a beginner, it might take a little bit longer. In general, the results for henna take between 24 to 48 hours as well. I will only be showing you how to do the henna and then how to look after it, but I won't be showing, for example, 24 hours later or 48 hours later. But just so that you are aware, after you've applied henna and you remove the paste, it may look rather faded, but don't lose heart. That's part of the dyeing process. It will take a few hours to a couple days for the henna to really stain and shine and show results. Okay, so that being said, we're just going to get into it. Usually henna comes with a little nail in the end, and you just want to take that nail out. Be mindful if you do have children or pets nearby. And I like to save this nail. Some people will trim the edge if they find that they don't like the point. As you can see, it is quite thin. You can trim it back, but you don't want to trim it too far, otherwise you're going to end up with a really wide nozzle at the end. And if anyone has experience with piping, it makes it much harder to control really fine details. So I like to just leave it as it is. Then what you want to do is kind of like to imagine holding it like a pen. And that's going to enable you to get really in on the fine detail. But to check that the henna is fresh and clean and you want to get started with it, so I'm just going to use this paper towel here. I'm just going to take the end here and just squeeze, and then do a couple lines like that. Now, if the henna is looking dry or flaky, there is a chance that the henna you are using is old. If you are using fresh henna like this, then you're going to want to store it in a cool place before you begin. And once you've opened the henna, you even want to store it in the fridge if you're going to use it again, or in the freezer, and they can last up to 6 months. So it is rather good if you buy fresh as well. I always like to practice doing henna. Make sure that I am used to using the lines. So if you want to get in with the detail, a tip I got from a professional, because I am not, is to take the end. You want to focus on the end. If you go all the way up here, you're not going to have that same level of control that you would if you were to do it towards the end. And then squeeze. You want to bend the henna as well, like this, and then that way you're not going to get the whole of the henna coming out of the tube. You are actually cutting it off like this, and you have as much henna as you would in here. Once you come to the end, you're going to want to squeeze it again, just gently, and then bend it and start again. So those are some little household rules as well. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it. You can just wipe it off, but do keep in mind that some mistakes are permanent. This is a staining product, so just be mindful of that. It's always good to just quickly wipe it away, or you could use a cotton bud that you'd use for your ears, for example, if you want to get in that detail. So now that we're ready to begin, I'm quite happy with that. Let's get started. Okay, also if you have any jewelry, you are going to want to remove them because you don't want to risk staining your jewelry. I've prepped my skin. I exfoliated hair removal the night before. I applied lotions. Again, I do get dry skin. Again, the night before. If you are going to be having a shower or anything like that, it's always good to do it before you begin using henna. As I said before, water will slow down the process. So now that we're ready, let's start. So the fun facts about henna is that it is over 5,000 years old, which was a massive surprise to me because I had never known it to be that old. There are documents about henna being even older, up to 9,000 years old, which again was quite a surprise to me. It has been found on Egyptian mummies, for example, in their hair. They also found it on the ends of their fingertips and toes. Cleopatra was also known to use henna as well as a beauty product. So if you're not confident in doing straight lines, don't worry about it. The beautiful thing about doing henna is that if you make a mistake, it's best to just roll with it and pretend like you did it on purpose. So the other things about henna as well, originally it was used for its healing properties and its cooling properties. People would apply henna to the palms of their hands and their feet, predominantly because henna is found in drier conditions in the desert, for example. So people would use it to enable them to remain cool. And as long as the henna was on their body and it was wet, it would help them feel that cooling sensation. And then over time, as they observed the staining properties of henna once they had dried, this gave way to ideas of decoration. There are as well different properties for henna. For example, it has been used for hair, as I mentioned. It's used for nails. And it was applied in areas such as like the forehead to help manage headaches and migraines, as it was believed that this would help with these ailments, and it was an ailment. Henna is used all over the world. The most popular places and the areas of origin can be originally found to be in India, Pakistan, Africa, and all over the Middle East as well. And then over time, it did migrate towards the West, and you see celebrities such as Madonna and even Gwen Stefani, to name a few, have also used henna as a form of decoration. Henna wasn't just for the wealthy, it was also used by poor people and the working class and slaves and things as a means to decorate their body because they couldn't afford jewelry. Like anything, the more you practice using henna, the better you're going to get at it. And again, if you think to yourself, oh, it's not perfect, that's okay. I'll just rub it. So the pattern that I'm going to be doing is taking inspiration from different patterns that I have seen over the years. that I've been doing henna on and off. I always like to experiment with different patterns. And it's interesting to see different cultures will apply henna differently. In places like Morocco and Sudan, for example, they will typically apply henna to their fingertips and the palms of the hands in kind of like a block motion. It's very different wherever you go. The color of henna it begins as a plant, as a leaf, and from that the leaves are then crushed and the pigment is released, which is a reddish orange color. And it is this pigment that is naturally occurring in the plant that stains to keratin in the skin naturally, and that is what enables the henna to bind to the skin and stain it. Also, depending on the quality of circulation you have in your body, will also determine the staining and the quality of the staining as well of henna. You may have come across black henna. However, black henna is not a naturally occurring pigment in the plant, and it is typically a result of chemicals which can be harmful to the body. So if you are going to a henna parlor, for example, and the technician is applying predominantly black henna, it may be best to go somewhere else where they are going to be applying henna that has this reddish brown hue, like as you can see here mine, because it is 100% henna, it's brown. It will stain different depending on the color of your skin, and as I mentioned before, the quality of blood circulation you have. So for example, I have rather poor circulation in my hands, and because the henna stains and binds to keratin, the thicker parts of your skin as well. So for example, the palms of your hands, the bottom of your feet, where you have typically thicker skin, you have more keratin there, so the henna will stain and bind to that skin and provide a richer and darker color compared to if you were to do it on the back of your hand. And the further you get away from these extremities, the lighter the shade of henna will be. You can, the ways that you can manage that if you don't want the henna to be so light and you want it to be more uniform, is once the henna is dried and you've removed it, you can then go over it again and repeat this process as many times as you want until you get that really dark color that you desire. And this is something that people have done in order to achieve this dark color. Now, one of the reasons why is predominantly due to culture. So for example, there is this idea in some wedding traditions that when the bride applies henna to her body, to her hands and feet, the darker the color of henna stains, the happier and more fruitful her marriage will be. And also how the relationship of between herself and her mother-in-law will also be as well. So you can see why it'd be beneficial to have really dark henna. Some patterns do have cultural significance. So for example, Paisley is an example. I will be showing an example of a Paisley is one of them, and this pattern is predominantly to do with fortune and bringing just good luck. You also have the flowers. You can see a lot of flowers in henna, and they are representative of joy. There are examples of using birds, and they are seen to be like traditional messengers of the earth. So the swan, for example, is a sign of elegance, and the peacock is an example of beauty. So if you have a peacock decorated on your hand, for example, it's just reflective of these ideas. There is another example of a pattern. I'm going to say it wrong, so I apologize in advance. And I believe it's something like the Sahra, I think. Saying it wrong, I'm butchering it, I apologize. But that is a chakra in Hindu culture and Hindu religion. And that is to represent the connection between the body and the mind and the earth. And you would recognize it by the almost like lotus looking shape that it takes on. It traditionally has like 20 layers of petals as well in it. It's just something falling down. So as you can see here, like it's not completely uniform. You can do this more uniform if you want. It is completely up to yourself how you want it to look. If you want it to look really uniform, for example, you don't want to rush. Don't be afraid to lift your hand up and move it around as well. If you are feeling nervous about doing henna for the first time, it might be a good idea to practice on paper, for example. You might see eyes drawn, so a single eye, for example, drawn as part of the pattern, and this is to reflect protection as well. So I've grown up using henna since I was a child. I've always had memories of henna, especially when going to weddings in Pakistani and Indian cultures. It is also typical of Middle Eastern as well, particularly if you are religious. If you're a Muslim, for example, there is such thing as a mendi, and mendi is another name for henna. So you might find that the name, they kind of switch between the two, so they both mean the same thing. It might be mendi, mehendi, or henna, hinna. They all essentially mean the same thing. The origin of the word henna, the English word henna, originates from the Arabic word al-hinna, which is how we form the English word henna. So as I mentioned before, it is typical of the Middle East, and you will find henna and mendi in the Middle East region. But as I mentioned, during the mendi, it is a celebration for the bride, and it is kind of a party before she gets married. So she will usually invite her family, her friends. They may put on a dance performance for her. The bride herself might get involved. And during the ceremony, she will have, and the celebration, she will have her mendi done. Typically, it tends to be on the hands and feet, and they can go anywhere from to the elbow or all the way up the arm towards the shoulder. And she might have a few henna artists working on one go, just to speed up the process a little bit. And while she's waiting for it to dry and while she's having it done, she will witness the festivities, so just seeing her friends celebrate her continuing marriage, and through dancing, through performances, just genuinely just having a good time. But it's one of my favorite parts of a wedding is the mendi. The colors that the bride will wear are also reflective of henna in general. So for example, she's more likely to wear more natural occurring colors, so she might wear yellow, greens. She might wear pinks as well, or gold, for example, and they're all kind of synonymous with the plant henna. And then the rest of her family and friends will also follow suit. And they too will also wear similar colors. So she won't necessarily, it's not typical for the bride to wear white, for example. That she will probably save for her wedding day if she chooses to wear white, depending as well on her culture, her cultural preferences. And then guests of the bride will also have small amounts of henna done on their hands typically, so usually either on the palms or the backs of their hands, just so that they too can get in on the celebration and the festivities. However, this is not always the case. Sometimes the bride now will have her mendi done in advance, just so that she can enjoy and get in on the festivities. So if she wants to dance, for example, she might have already had her henna done. But usually the mendi will take place a few days before the wedding day, to allow the henna to really take form and give plenty of time for it to stain so that by her wedding day she can enjoy the full effects of henna. So as I said, it is quite a long process. It usually takes anywhere between 24 to 48 hours. So you can imagine if you are a bride and you are thinking of having your mehndi done, you will want to have it done 1 or 2 days before your wedding takes place. Just so that then it will really shine and show in those photos. And the guests and yourself can just really enjoy the full effects of it. Weddings are not the only time mehndi is applied. It is also applied for Eid celebration and other ceremonies and celebration festivities. You don't need an occasion to apply a henna, because the point of henna really is to signify joy and happiness. So when you are thinking of applying henna, that's kind of what you're reflecting and saying to the world. It's a form of expression as well, and enables you to just really show off your creativity and ingenuity and your patience as well. So the pattern I'm doing right now, this is how it's looking. Quite simple. There are so many different ways of doing this, and they're all unique. You, again, could have your own way of doing it. If you don't feel very confident in following a pattern, for example, just consider doodling. That small spirals that you might do, or flowers, etc., in the corner of your notebook could just be now your hand. So it's whatever you feel comfortable. You might only feel comfortable doing a very tiny pattern to begin with, but just know that no matter what happens, henna will always, like, it's quite forgiving, and unless you smudge really badly, it is a very forgiving form of pattern making on the body. So here, for example, I've done like a simple line and it's wiggly. It's not straight. And I just think, you know what, that is fine, because I have a plan. I'm going to make that into some petals. And the great thing about doing petals is that they aren't straight, you know. But you know, if you want to make this more perfect, feel free to do so. So whenever I say I'm not professional, you might be able to tell. I typically do not do patterns that are really traditional. You will see some influences from traditional patterns, but for the most part I tend to go off script, mainly because I don't practice them enough, but also I'm quite a creative person and I like to do different stuff. I once did a series of flowers going from one end of my arm, wrapping around to kind of like here, and it was in between it has like scales, and then the head was a dragon breathing fire with flowers, and it was just a lot of fun and it looked amazing, and you can kind of tell a little bit more my character based off that. But everyone was just like, wow, it looks amazing, and I was just like, well, it's not traditional. So that should give you some idea, you know, that you can genuinely do whatever you want. Now the reason why henna is favored as well is because it is not permanent. So if you do find that you've made a mistake, just rest easy, it will fade. If you find, however, you do not like it, you cannot keep it on any longer, there are ways to remove henna and speed up the process of removing it. So for example, you can use lemon juice. You could also exfoliate the area. Do remember though to be gentle because it is still your skin, and if you have already exfoliated in preparation to do henna, you've already moved a layer, the epidermal layer of your skin. And if you are going to then add even more abrasion to the area by trying to scrub the henna off, that's going to increase the chance of you irritating your skin. So it is something to keep in mind. Other techniques, if you want, for example, wanted to do shading with henna, I recommend getting a little pot, either of water or oil, and then using a paintbrush and just dipping the paintbrush into the oil and then kind of like painting like that, and you will diffuse the henna. So that is another tip. I'm just going to use my henna to make these kind of marks. And as I mentioned before, you get better as the more you do it. The only times you don't see henna being applied is during mourning. So if you are, for example, grieving or have suffered a loss, you won't see henna being applied. It's not a time to apply henna. And this is because, again, henna is traditionally a form of celebration and expression of celebration. So if you do decide that you want to do some henna, it's probably best to wait until the mourning grieving period is over before you engage in using henna again. Okay, so as you can see, this is the pattern I'm currently creating. And if you do find that there are some areas where the pigment is a little thinner, for example, you can go over it like this. If you want a thicker line, it's best to begin with a thin line and then build up rather than have a thicker line and try to reduce the henna to a thinner line. It won't really work because you'll already have stained that area. Now we're going to go on to doing a Paisley design. So this is a traditional henna pattern you see. There are lots of different ways of going about it. Essentially, you're going to have one center in the middle, go around, here. And you could then either go this. And if you want to begin to extend kind of rods here. So I mentioned before that henna has staining properties, but it's not permanent. And this is why you'll find that, particularly in religious groups like in Islam, henna is favorable. It is accepted, it is a sunnah in Islam to use henna, which means like it's permitted. Men will typically use henna in their hair and their beards, and women will use it for decorative purposes. No matter what your skin color is, henna will look beautiful, but it will stain a different color depending on the color of your skin. You can buy henna that will produce a more consistent coloring. So for example, I mentioned that black henna before. So you could get henna that has pigments and dyes mixed in and blended with the henna, so that no matter what your skin color is, you will produce a darker stain. But if you're buying natural henna, then it will vary from skin tone to skin tone, and either way will always look very beautiful. There is different forms of henna now. Now henna in general, I will say, is just traditionally red, orangey brown, but you can get white henna, which is a man-made product. It's not natural, and it tends to be either a form of paint or glue. I've seen in some cases, say for the skin, but most people use stick-ons. I would recommend a stick-on if you want to use white henna. It's going to reduce the chance of you putting toxins on your body and exposing yourself to toxins. Whereas if you're using a stick-on, you know, that's temporary. It will give you that lasting effect for the day, and then you can just peel it off at the end, and that also is quite flattering as well. It's quite different. Just doing a little leaf there. So you might be thinking, okay, I have this Paisley design. What is it that I want to do inside? It's up to you. You can echo the pattern that you saw me do earlier in here. So for example, I would begin doing a dot, and then circle, as I mentioned, it is typical in religions to use henna. Judaism also has a history of using henna, as well as Islam. And the reason why we don't wear tattoos, for example, is because we need to be able to make wudu, which is a form of purification. And essentially we wash our hands, and feet, and face, and arms, which are the typical places where you place henna. And the water needs to be able to touch the skin and permeate the skin, so enter the skin. And it can't do that if there is a barrier. So for example, nail polish, paint, dirt, tattoos, it can't enter the skin, it can't enter that layer. So we're not considered pure when we then go, or clean when we then go to pray. And the same thing for if you were to place the henna, or like if you were to do a tattoo, for example, on other parts of your body, it still can't go, you still can't tattoo on different parts of your body because you have to, there are other forms of purification that you may do throughout the month. Another one's called ghusl, which is a more thorough and deeper cleansing ritual that Muslims will perform for various reasons. And if they have a tattoo on their body, for example, then they won't be considered to have performed ghusl properly. So again, they won't be considered pure. So it's really important that whatever we place on our bodies isn't going to stain. And this is why things like henna is considered acceptable. So I'm just going to remove the cling film wrap. I put cling film wrap down just in case I didn't want to get it anywhere, but I might remove it now. So as you can see here, I'm just echoing some of the patterns that I found here. just to kind of make it a little bit more symmetrical, a little bit more balance to it. And I think I'm just going to do some vines. Now, there are different ways of doing the vines, and I've seen, I'll admit, better versions than others. Mine might just be tolerable. Now, of course, you don't need to be from the Middle East or have like a particular reason to do henna. You could just purely be doing it for fun. I have also seen henna used and adopted for, as I mentioned, like forms of expression. It's also used traditionally in, or it's becoming traditional, to use henna on the stomach of pregnant women for photo shoots. A beautiful fact I learned recently was people who have used henna to decorate their heads whilst they're going through chemotherapy, which I think is a really wonderful use of henna. And it is not something that is, I'd say, is owned by any particular race or culture around the world. Even though it is predominantly found, and the origin of henna is in certain countries, it is now known around the world, and people from around the world are using henna as a form of expression and to decorate their body. Because of its properties, its healing properties, and its decorative properties, people want to use it and educate themselves more about different cultures and things like that. So don't feel that you can't participate in using henna because you're not African or Middle Eastern or Pakistani, etc. Henna is for everyone. If, like me, you're now starting to go underneath the arm, which is a mistake. It's not a mistake, it's just if you are going to do that, you will have to lift your hand up into the air. Because if I place it down, I'm going to risk smudging it. So now that I've done this pattern up here, I'm going to then go on to the fingers, which are my favorite part of doing henna. I like all of it, but generally I love doing the fingers. Just going to finish this bit of the palm. I'll explain why I like doing things in a minute. If you are going to do henna on children, I recommend only doing henna on children age 5 and above, mainly so that they're more likely to sit still and have the patience to enable you to do the henna on them, and to understand that they need to let it dry, for example. And just, if you do it with them and just show, that it's safe and it's fun, you can make it into like a game, they're much more likely to enjoy it and want to participate in it again and just form, happier memories of using henna than when they're younger, and they're more likely to get it everywhere and all over themselves and their clothes. It does stain fabric. Henna has been used not only for clothes, but also, sorry, not only for the skin, but also for fabric. It is used in leather, for example, and to dye fabric like silks and cottons and things, due to its staining properties, but also its antifungal and anti-pesticide, anti-pest, not pesticide, anti-pest properties. It makes the fabric toxic to insects, so they're less likely to be moth-bitten and ingested because they're stained with henna. There are documents of henna being decorated on drum skin, for example, of drums. So there are lots of different uses for henna, not just for decorating the body. Okay, so I have finished the pattern that I wanted to do here. I'm fairly happy with it. If I want to go back, you can already see that it's starting to dry. A simple test is just to wave your hand or whatever part of your body you're decorating with henna. And if it's still shiny, then you can see that it's still wet. But other areas, you can just poke it as well with the end of your henna cone. If you try to touch it with your finger, you're more likely to smudge it and you're more likely to get henna on you. I didn't mention this before, but I probably should have. Some cones can leak. If they do, you'll just find that your hand is turning a little bit orange. That's fine. Wrap it up in some cling film or put a glove on and then continue on with that henna. Just make sure it's not a fabric glove. I'd use a plastic one, for example. Okay, so once you've got the pattern on here, I could continue to go up and up and up if I wanted to, but I won't. I'm now going to do a finger. Now, the reason why I love doing the fingers is because you can either make them really uniform, you can do just the one or two, or you can do lots of different patterns for each finger. And it enables you to get creative with what you've already done. Here, for example, so just like with the Paisley design, I'm going to take elements from the whole pattern for each finger and just really highlight all the different patterns that I've been doing. So for example, just going to do a very small Paisley. Like this. And it doesn't have to be the same. I think the most impressive henna I've ever seen is when they have really straight lines. It's so much easier when you're doing it on other people than trying to do henna on yourself. And if you don't practice it, it's going to be really hard. Everyone has their own tips on how to use henna as well. You just pick what is best and works best for you and go from there. I think the thing that impresses me most about henna artists is that they really are just working from their own imagination. If it looks made up, it's probably because it is. But they will tend to have set designs that they are kind of like their go-to, just to save on time. If you have, for example, like 200 guests that you've got to get through in like 4 hours, then you're going to want to make sure that you have some pre-planned patterns in mind. So to help you draw straighter lines on your fingers, try not to go in between your fingers because you're much more likely to bring your fingers together. I am allergic to the sun. Fun fact, yes, that is a real thing. And as such, essentially, I'm very sensitive to the sun. So I was very happy to learn that henna does act as a sunblock and will protect the skin from the sun. So you can bet your bottom dollar that during uh, the summer I will be decorating my arms in henna. It does create naturally occurring tan lines. So if you are prone to tanning, if you do go to salons, for example, to tan your skin, keep that in mind. If you have henna on, it is going to cause a tan line once the henna has faded. So my advice is to check online some extra tips on how to protect your skin and how to align the henna and the tanning process. So for example, if you want the henna to fade alongside your tan, it might be best that you get the tan done first and then apply henna. Or you might want to have a decorated tan line, like a more patterned tan line. That could be what you want. So it's just something to keep in mind. So this is one finger. I could leave it at this and stop the process, but I am going to quickly show you some other pattern ideas you could do. So I have drawn some leaves. So I'm going to do some more. Like I said, each finger can be different. I would just say, suggest that you take inspiration from your main pattern just to create some unity. So I'm just kind of bending the cone so that I can squeeze it at the top and then really focus the henna at the bottom. Anyone who's used henna before will have had mishaps at least once in their life. The funniest ones for me are when I put my hand down or I forget that I've got henna on and it just smudges and I'm like, no, all that effort wasted. But you just gotta carry on, keep calm, resign yourself to the fact you've ruined it. It's always best to make sure that your skin is clear so that you don't have any sweat or dirt, etc. on your skin. Nothing that's going to stop this henna from penetrating the skin, essentially. You can also use henna on the nails, and you know, I've known people to either color their nails in henna or like simply just to leave their hand completely plain and they just purely do their nails. There is no such thing as henna nail polish, which is permeable to water, and you can pray and things like that in it, and it offers different colors. It's quite amazing, actually. So right now I'm just leading from the main pattern out. You don't actually need to do that if you don't want to. So for example, you could do something like this. It's always good to make sure that you have spare henna so that you don't risk running out. If you know, for example, you're going to be doing a large amount of henna, so for example on your arms and your legs, you are going to probably need more than one cone of henna, and it may take more than one setting. So for example, it might take a couple days for you to do the whole thing, or if you have the time. you might be able to do it all in a day, but it will take a few hours. So as you can see here, I'm not connecting the bottom pattern to the main one. I could do if I wanted to. So I could, for example, just do some here, like so, just to add a little bit of symmetry to it. But I don't need to connect it to the bottom one. I could have just decorated this one. For engagement photos, I have seen people just purely decorating their ring finger. That is an idea. If you want more information about how to do particular patterns, as I said before, it's always good to check online and see how other people are doing it. I've seen some great tips online on how to do them. Things, for example, like if you want to create a vine, it's good to start from the end and really push that bulb out and then down, or to start really thin and then push more henna out, so you build up henna. There are different ways of doing it, and it's best just to see what works for you. If you're prone to shaking, it's fine, just take your time, don't rush. It'll be okay. Okay, so once you feel like you've finished doing the henna, I think you've had enough, you don't really want to do any more, you can stop here and you can either let it air dry or you can use a hairdryer. I have seen people use a fan as well. If you're going to use a hairdryer, it is best to make sure that you don't place the hairdryer close to the skin, because you're more likely to concentrate the heat and burn your skin. So it's best to hold it roughly about 10 to 20 centimeters away from the body. Use a kind of like waving motion or wafting motion with the hairdryer. If you have a cool setting on your hairdryer, I would use that instead of heat, so that then you're going to reduce the chance of you burning your skin. Once you have the paste, this is when your scraper is going to come into play. and you begin to flake and scrape the henna away. If it's still wet, stop scraping that area and just let it dry. Do not apply water to the area. If you can refrain from water for 24 hours, that would be the best option. Obviously, that is not doable if, for example, you're doing it on your hands. You could, for example, when you're doing the pots, just put gloves on instead. It's always good to try and do henna at nighttime so that then you're not going to come into contact with water for at least 4 to 8, maybe even 10 hours, depending on when you go to bed and how long you sleep for, etc. And if you are going to go to bed, this is where getting cling film wrap comes into play. So what I like to do is I always wait for it to be dry on the surface. I take some cling film wrap and then I place the cling film wrap on top, making sure that it is stretched out so that I can make use as much of it as possible. I place it on and then I will wrap the cling film around. As you can see, it's still wet, so it is touching the cling film and that would have stained, but it's fine because I took it off. Because you're applying cling film to the area, it will cause your hand or wherever you place the cling film to sweat because you're trapping in heat. This is good as it will keep the henna wetter for longer, and the longer you keep the henna wet, the greater the stain will be. The faster your henna dries or you dry your henna out, it will still stain for a long period of time, but it won't be as dark or pigmented as if you'd kept it wet. If you are interested in doing something like that, you can create a sugar lemon paste or spray and respray the area to moisten your henna again and then let it dry. But that is purely experimental and results will vary from time to time, so just keep that in mind. But if you are doing this for the first time, you're a beginner, it's best to just let the henna dry naturally or use a hairdryer. Or let it dry, apply the cling film wrap, and then I get a little bit of duct tape and I will tape it down just to stop the cling film wrap from coming off when I go to bed. I'll also lay down a towel on top of my duvet and then place my hand on top of that, a towel that I'm not bothered about letting it stain, and go to sleep that way. If you are sensitive to smells though, this might not be the best idea, and it's probably best if you dry the henna and scrape it off before you go to bed. Once you finish scraping the henna off, this is when you're going to use oil, and I suggest just taking no more than a teaspoon or half a teaspoon even maximum, and just putting it whichever oil you're using and applying it directly to the henna once the paste has been removed. So you will apply it to the henna stain and then just gently rub or pat the oil into your skin. And this is going to protect your skin from water. It's going to make it water repellent, slightly water repellent. It's also going to help the henna to stain and will protect your skin and moisten your skin as well, because we have been abrasive once you are scraping away, so it will add a little bit of moisture back into your skin. Do not use an oil that you are allergic to. Again, if you are using an oil that you're not familiar with, for example, jojoba oil or coconut oil, make sure that you check beforehand, do a patch test on your skin to make sure that you're not going to have an adverse reaction to the oil that you're using. I wouldn't recommend putting henna or oil, etc., on an open wound, for example, or on broken skin. I'd always double check with a dermatologist or your GP before you do that. You do put it on your skin if you are allergy prone or you're using a topical ointment, etc. It's probably best that you don't mix the two together with the henna or with an oil, etc. If you are using like a steroid cream or topical treatment, excuse me. So they're just some house rules to consider when you're doing henna. Other than that, once the henna has dried, you've removed it, you've applied the oil, I would then continue about your day. You don't need to worry at that point of it staining any of your clothes. It's only whilst the henna is still drying and is still a paste on your skin that if it does come into contact with your clothes, it will potentially stain your clothes or other parts of your skin. You can add petroleum jelly or Vaseline, for example, to certain parts of your body where you don't want the henna to stain. So, for example, if you are going to decorate the fingernails, for example, you could apply a thin layer of petroleum jelly around the cuticle area and around the thumb to protect it from the henna bleeding and staining the rest of your skin. So those are some extra tips for when you're doing your henna. I hope you've enjoyed this workshop and learning some facts about henna. And I look forward to seeing what designs that you create. If you also have some fun facts about henna that you'd like to share, then please do get in touch and add them in your comments and your description boxes, and when you are sharing your images of henna that you've done. The other places that you can do henna other than the hand would be the palm of the hand, the arms, the feet, your legs, your stomach area. But do remember that the further you get from the palms of your hands, where the skin is thicker, and the bases of your feet, the lighter the henna will be. The thinnest parts of your skin tends to be on the back area, for example, further up the arm. So the henna won't stain as darkly. If you do remove the henna and you scrape it off and you've applied oil and you decide, actually, I want, if you do remove the stain, the henna, and you've scraped it off and you do decide to go over the henna again, do that before you apply the oil, because it will work better and has a greater chance of the henna staining your skin and reaching your skin than if there's a barrier. Once you put that oil on, you're creating a barrier between your skin and the henna. So it's a good idea to do the henna again before you add oil. I'd always stress that doing the oil is the last stage after you have removed the henna paste, always. You can also moisturize the area of your skin if you do find that your skin has become a little bit red and inflamed. I just add a very small amount once you've oiled the area and you've removed the henna paste, because any liquid that you apply to your henna will, with the paste still applied, will cause the henna to become wet again. So these are just some things to keep in mind. It's all an experience. I would have fun getting creative and experimenting as well, and just playing about and seeing what occurs. Once this henna has fully disappeared, then you can go ahead and reuse the henna again. With any henna, as I said before, naturally occurring, so 100% henna cones that you purchase, you can then refrigerate or put in the freezer and they will last up to 6 months. Take them out and leave them for about an hour to thaw before you use the henna. After that point, you won't be able to refreeze it and you will have to throw it away. I always keep the nail, and because I haven't trimmed the end, I can then pop the nail back in, and then from there pop it into a bag. I've found that henna like this, if it's not refrigerated, tends to last between 1 to 3 days, and then after that I will have to throw the henna away unless I put it in a Ziploc bag and I freeze it or refrigerate it. Other than that, I hope that you have learned something today. I know I certainly did whilst I was doing the research for this video, and I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Have a lovely day and take care.